Hello, everybody, and welcome. Good morning. I'm Dr. Sarah Diamond, and I am an OCAD University Research Chair and President Emerita, and I'm very happy to moderate today's dialogue. I'm one of the faculty in this amazing collaboration with the City of Toronto that this course is. So welcome to the CivicLab Toronto curriculum session focused on building homes faster. I lead a lab at OCAD University that focuses on the ways that design and emerging technologies can help to support complete, equitable, and healthy communities. And the theme of student housing and affordable housing, which we will touch on today, is dear to all of our hearts. And we were just chatting earlier that in terms of student concerns, the question of affordability, in particular affordable housing, has eclipsed transit as a focus. So we're going to have a very exciting dialogue, I think. As this meeting is both in person and virtual, and we are not all gathered in the same space, I recognize that this land acknowledgement may not be for the territory where you are currently located. We ask that if this is the case, you acknowledge the traditional territories where you are and the current treaty holders. So for those of us in Toronto, I'd like to acknowledge that we are the land that we are situated on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is also now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit, and for more than a millennium, Tekaronto, Toronto, has been governed by the Dish with One Spoon Agreement, a creation of the Anishinaabeg and the Haudenosaunee peoples that speaks to the importance of peace, something that resonates in our era, and the need to share resources equitably, replace what is used, and not foul the bowl that we share. So these are principles that certainly can be extended to urban planning at its best. So just to provide a brief description of today's event, the CivicLabTO curriculum is presented by Strategic Partnerships and the City Manager's Office within the City of Toronto in collaboration with the 8 higher education institutions represented here today, either physically or virtually. And civic leaders from the city and the higher education institutions are forging a path of partnership and innovation between our organizations. Now, this session is a little bit different. We're often in the council's chambers, but today we're in committee room 2 with a bit of spillover in committee room 3. And several partner institutions have chosen to be online today in order to make sure that we have enough space both here and for the conversations online. Before I pass it on to our guest speakers for today's session, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. So we're being recorded, and participants are asked not to share any personal information within the meeting. The session will also be available on www.civiclabto.ca or through the curriculum sources, and we will make it available in the near future to you. We also make the recordings available online to a larger population. And if you've joined us in person, welcome, and please note that we ask that you avoid using, bit of water, that you avoid joining the virtual WebEx seminar. Washrooms are located in the hallways behind the session, and there'll be time for Q&As at the end of today's event. If you are joining the session virtually, and would you like to submit a question, enter it under the Q&A feature at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you have a mic at your chair, you will be able to speak into the built-in microphone, and you will press the speaking button to activate the mic and have a sip of water before you speak, unlike me. Sorry about that. Once you ask your question, press the speaking button again to mute the mic. We have a wireless mic which will be also circulated in the room, which can be brought to your seat. Raise your hand, and one of our team members will walk to the microphone and give it to you. We remind you again to avoid disclosing personal notes when asking your questions. If you're joining us virtually, you'll be manually muted during the event, And if you are in City Hall and have joined the WebEx meeting, please mute your devices. Speakers, that's a lot of technical advice. So, on to the show. Yes, so today we're going to hear from Jason Thorne, the Chief Planner and Executive Director of City Planning, Mercedes Medina, Director Policy and Strategy, Housing Secretariat, and then Sean Baird, President and CEO, Toronto Community Housing. We also have a very special youth-focused budget consultation organized for CivicLabTO. Once we've wrapped up here, you can make your way to the ground floor in the classroom space, and you'll have the opportunity to learn about the municipal budgeting process and share your priorities for Toronto's 2026 budget. So it will start at 11:15 and run till noon, so stay if you can. Jennifer McGowan, Manager, Public Consultation, will say a few words about this at the end of the agenda. So lots forthcoming in today's fantastic session. So now that I've found my voice again, I'm very happy to invite Jason Thorne, Chief Planner and Executive Director, City Planning, to share his thoughts.
Thank you very much. I'm just getting my presentation pulled up on the screen here. Thanks, and good morning, everyone. So I'm Jason Thorne. I'm the Chief Planner, Executive Director of City Planning. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're planning for growth in the city, maybe set a bit of the stage for some of the next speakers and the discussion to come. Very quickly, this is what our team looks like, our division looks like. We do the work related to policy, growth analytics for the city, transportation planning, all of the planning on the waterfront, urban design, heritage, all sits within the city planning division. I'm going to start with this rather bold statement, rather obvious statement that Toronto is growing. And I start with this because I do a lot of talking with neighborhood groups, residents associations, and I like to lead with this because often when you ask people, about, what do you think the fastest growing areas are within sort of Canada, the US, people might say, oh, it's got to be New York, or it's got to be Los Angeles, or maybe Dallas, Fort Worth. It's actually us, and not by a little bit, but by a long shot. The Toronto CMA over 2023 and 2024 was the fastest growing in Canada and the US. And you can see that traced on our skyline. This is the Toronto skyline in 2006. If you add to this all of the built, approved projects over the last few years, this is the Toronto skyline in 2025. So you can see the impact of that growth in real physical ways on our skyline. And by all accounts, it's going to continue. We track something that we call our development pipeline, and this is tracking all of the future housing units that are either working their way through the approvals process, or they are approved but not yet started construction, or they're under construction. And as of right now, we have about 740,000 unbuilt residential units in that development pipeline. So we have a lot of growth coming as well. And that's a good thing, because Toronto needs to build more housing. We are on track to become a city of just over 4 million people in the next 25 years, which actually puts us on pace, actually on a faster growth pace than what was predicted in the provincial growth plan, a faster growth pace both in terms of population and in terms of employment. And of course, there's a lot of challenges that come with that rate of growth. One of them obviously being housing affordability. This graph shows the ratio of housing prices to average household incomes. When I bought my first home 20-ish years ago, it was about 3 times. The average house cost about 3 times the average household income. Now it's up over 5 times. And that really gets at the nub. I know we talk a lot when we're talking about housing affordability just about the pure price of housing or the cost of housing. It's actually that cost of housing relative to incomes that really is the most meaningful metric. And it's going in the wrong direction. We've had some good activity in the last couple of years around rental housing. It had been very low for a long period of time, but we still see rental vacancy rates below what is generally considered a bit of a healthy rate of 3%. And the changing demographics in the city is also something that we think about a lot in city planning. And one of the trends that causes some concern is the decline in the proportion of households with children. So this is looking at, can a young family afford to live in the city of Toronto? And what we've seen in recent years is that that proportion of households with children is dropping. And then interestingly as well, and this is a slide that sometimes surprises people, is that while the city is growing quite a bit, it's not growing in an even way. We see the red areas on this map are areas of high growth, and that probably won't surprise any when you see those red areas. But notwithstanding all the growth that's happening, we actually have areas of the city that are declining in population. And that may be sort of counterintuitive at first, because it's not like we're out there demolishing houses and replacing them with, I don't know, farm fields or something. But because household sizes are declining, it means we have fewer people living in those homes. So if we aren't building more homes, those populations are actually decreasing. And you can see that in the dark blue and light blue areas on this map, where you see either stagnating population or declining population. And of course, that has very big impacts on things like services, on schools, on transit, all of those things that rely upon a population base to support them. So of course, it's very important that we continue to build housing, and I know that's kind of the theme of this session today, but it can't just be any housing. This is an important consideration for us in city planning. We need housing across what we call the housing spectrum, from social housing through to market home ownership. I won't spend a lot of time here because the next speakers are going to speak more about that. Our housing needs to be green. We know that in the City of Toronto, over 50% of our GHG emissions comes from the building sector. So if we have any chance at all of achieving our net zero goals, we have to make sure the next million homes have a very different sustainability profile than the last million homes. It needs to be well designed. We need to think, I think it's very important to think about high quality design, high quality architecture. We're building homes not just to meet an immediate need, we're building buildings that are going to be here for decades and maybe even centuries. It needs to sensitively integrate with our existing built heritage. We're accommodating all of this growth. You think about that 740,000 units in our development pipeline. A lot of that is occurring on properties and in locations where we have an existing built heritage, an existing built fabric. And how are we integrating and making that part of the new development, not necessarily letting that sort of heritage fabric prevent new development, but be part of the new development that is coming. It needs to be affordable. And again, I won't spend too much time here because you're going to hear a bit more about this in a moment. And so what I thought I'd spend a little bit of time about is that, this is what city planning does. This is what we think about. This is what we try to plan for. And we do have a plan for how to actually accommodate this growth and build a livable city. I know there's a number of planners here today, so I probably don't need to spend too much time on this, but this is always an important one when we're out talking in the community, is to understand the role of the province and the role of municipalities. So I'd like to show this slide to say that all of our authorities at the local level to regulate development, to plan for growth, are nested under the umbrella of provincial policies and provincial legislation. So that's where we derive our authorities, or lack thereof in some cases. And underneath that provincial policy and legislation, we then have this kind of hierarchy of planning instruments that we use, starting with our official plan, which establishes the citywide vision for the city. This is the primary policy document that guides growth and development. Nested under that, we have a series of various areas plans, neighborhood scale plans. These could be secondary plans, this type of thing. I've listed just a few here of ones that are kind of actively underway in city planning in North York, in Glencairn, in Woodbine, in Scarborough Centre. A number, those are larger scale ones. We also have some regeneration area studies that are looking at sort of smaller scale areas. And then these area neighborhood plans, in addition to being land use plans and directing where new housing is going to go, where densities are going to go, we work in tandem with that to do different community facility studies. So this is just an example. This is an excerpt from the Young Eglinton secondary plan. And what this is actually showing is not the future development, but the future community facilities. Where are the libraries? Where are the parks? Where are the rec centers? Both existing ones, expanded ones, and new ones, so that we can make sure that those amenities are growing at the same time the population is growing. And then with that development comes the revenues and the funds needed to invest in those facilities. So there's a lot on this slide. I don't expect you to just digest it all, but what we're showing here is on the left, those two columns under development are direct contributions that future development makes to those community facilities. That could be through development charges, which is probably the most important instrument we have to generate revenues with growth that pay for all of this community infrastructure. community benefits charges. Formerly in Toronto, we had something called Section 37, which provided funds in exchange for density to fund these kinds of facilities. Parkland contribution, those are direct contributions that development make to these amenities. And then importantly, and not to lose sight of, on the right-hand side, is there's all the indirect revenues that future growth brings through property taxes, through user fees, through debt financing, and so on. So as we've been thinking about sort of how do we address the challenge in front of us in terms of housing, I'm going to take you through just a couple of recent planning initiatives that we've done at the City of Toronto. And through the initiatives I'm going to go through over the last 3-4 years, and I could say in the planning world, 3-4 years is like the blink of an eye. So this is pretty, very recently, there's almost not a property in the City of Toronto that allows residential units, or that allows residential, that hasn't been either redesignated or upzoned in the past 3-4 years. So pretty much every single residential property in the city has been touched by the initiatives that I'm going to go through in the next couple of slides. And I'll start at the lower end of that, which is the gentle density, the increased density that's now permitted in what we call the neighborhoods. I don't know if people are familiar with the term the yellow belt, but for years, Toronto, like most cities, had what was known as a yellow belt, which is areas where basically all you could build was single detached homes, maybe some townhomes. That was 70% of the City of Toronto up until the last couple of years. So what we're showing here on the left is in yellow, areas where multiplexes were permitted just a couple of years ago, not very much of the city. So this could be, and this is everything from garden suites, laneway suites, 3plexes, 4plexes, 5plexes, 6plexes. Today, on the right, you see that pretty much every residential area, every part of the neighborhoods in the city permits some form of this gentle density multiplex. And that's pretty significant. So we've done some estimates of what that actually might mean in terms of future housing construction. And our estimates are about 123,000 units could be added to the City of Toronto over the next 25 years through garden suites, laneway homes, multiplexes. It's about like 15 to 20% of the housing supply that is needed over the next 25 years could be delivered through this form of gentle density as a result of the new permissions that exist today in the city. In 2024, Council approved a pretty significant new policy change that we call our Major Streets Initiative. That means all of these major streets shown here on the map now permit, as of right, up to 6 stories and 60 units. On our avenues, which have existed for a number of years in Toronto but have not grown in number until very recently, just a few months ago, City Council approved adding 282 kilometers of avenues across the city to our official plan. So this is areas where generally mid-rise development, 12, 13, 14 stories would be permitted. So all of these purple areas are now new avenues that have been created in the city. Just a few weeks ago, we added 120 major transit station areas across the city. These are areas where higher density forms of development are now permitted. We have about 30,000 new homes that we're expecting in what we call our transit-oriented communities. So far, we expect more of these transit-oriented communities to be identified in the years to come. And then we have a number of major growth areas, which is a bit unusual for a city as urban and mature as the City of Toronto to still have these like major areas where we can introduce significant new growth. In Toronto, just 2 of these, Downsview, the former airport site, Woodbine around the Woodbine racetrack, represent about 84,000 potential new homes. And then our waterfront in the East Harbour and Portlands, again, another major growth area in the city that has capacity for about another 60,000 new homes. So it's important to talk about housing, of course, and a lot of the, certainly all the planning initiatives I just spoke about are all looking at ways to how do we allow and permit much more housing, many more typologies of housing, so it's not just low-rise and high-rise, but many more typologies of housing, and across the city, in all parts of the city. So not just focused around a few nodes, a few corridors, a few transit station areas, but every corner of the city has now capacity to accommodate part of the future growth that we're going to need as a city. But I thought it was important to also talk about, it's not just about housing, and we can't just think about housing. We can't just be overly focused on the quantity of housing that we're building. We have to be focused on the quality of neighborhoods that we're creating, and that's a big part of what city planning does. So we have to think about shops and retail, and so this is an initiative that we're working through right now around opening up opportunities for small-scale retail in neighborhoods, bringing back the corner store, bringing back the corner cafe. Looking at parks and recreation facilities. This is probably the number one thing I hear when I'm talking to neighborhood groups about growth and development is, okay, what does that mean for capacity of my rec center? What does that mean for new parks? And we have over 200 park and recreation facility projects currently underway and in the planning stages across the city. And in addition to that, we have a privately owned, publicly accessible space program. So I'm not sure how familiar people will be with this, but often when we're looking at a new development, and we have a new development application in front of us, a lot of what city staff does is work with the developer to say, okay, how can we orient your buildings? How can we reorient your massing to create smaller little parkettes? It might be a parkette, it might be a plaza, it might be a pedestrian connection, a mid-block connection, that we try to knit these things together as part of a new development above and beyond what we secure as public park. The investment in transit happening right now in the city is really unprecedented. I mean, we're seeing more transit underway right now than we have seen in the last 50 years. I know not much of it is open yet, but fingers crossed it will all soon be open. So that really is fundamentally changing the DNA of the city. Like transit really does drive growth. And facilitates growth, and so this kind of investment happening in tandem with the population growth we're seeing is really critical. And not just transit, but other forms of transportation as well. Over 2016 to 2024, over 60 kilometers of protected bike lanes have been installed, which is the most we have ever seen in a period of a decade in the city's history. And it's also important to talk about, I think, to talk about art, to talk about beauty, to talk about joy, and all of these kinds of things that you're supposed to experience in a city. And that has to be part of our thinking about planning as well. And so through new development, in addition to our broader public art program, through new development, we've secured and created over 300 public art installations across the city as part of new development. And I already spoke a little bit about this. Again, we can't just think about housing. We have to think about all of the community infrastructure that goes along with it and that is needed to support the new population. So I will end, I think this is my last slide, in just saying we don't do this alone in city planning. City planning is very much a team sport. And so within government, in city planning, we work with a whole host of other partners from, some may be obvious ones, parks, transportation, our colleagues in housing who you're going to hear from in a moment, and transit and so on. But even things like social services. A lot of our land use planning is done in tandem with social service planning. And what do we need to support some of our at-risk communities? I put waste up there. How we do waste collection is a big driver of actually how we do growth and development and how we design buildings. Finance, fire. We work a lot with our fire department and our fire chief because a lot of their needs drive things like street design and access and loading requirements and building requirements. So everything that we touch in planning really has connections back to other partners within the city. And then externally, we work not just with neighborhood groups and residents associations and planners and architects and builders, but with entrepreneurs and with artists and with community leaders around what kind of city are we trying to shape and create through the growth that we're having. So I think that is it. That is my overview of some of the things we're working on, and I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks, Jason. What a fantastic, holistic setup for our conversation today. And there has been so much change, in the city in thinking about the rezoning changes, understanding the kind of transit planning in relationship to neighborhood growth, and the way you've spoken about the concept of complete communities that have both, really great housing access, great transportation and transit, and also all of the non-residential GFA, as we might call it, so, those amenities. So we'll come back to that. So thank you so much for sharing your vision and the level of change and growth in the city. Mercedes Madani is our next speaker, and she is the Director of Policy and Strategy for Housing. Over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here and talk to you a little bit about the work of the Housing Secretariat. I'll start a little bit about talking about myself. So my background is in urban planning, but I've always been very, very passionate about housing. I focused my master's degree around housing and learning more about specifically non-market housing, social, affordable, and co-op housing. The first assignment that I did when I went to my graduate school was to analyze the Street to Homes program that the City of Toronto still runs. I got to come to the city, talk to city staff who actually developed that policy, and this is a program that helps people who are unhoused and who live roughly on the streets to find a place inside, and in most cases go directly to a permanent stable home. When I learned about that program and actually got to work on it, I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do when I grow up. And I did that. And I came to the City of Toronto. I started working as an intern because I really wanted to be involved in the work that the local government does in helping people find housing that meets their needs. And worked my way up, and now I lead a team of about 30 very talented, very committed housing professionals who come to the team from various backgrounds. I have a very diverse, multidisciplinary team. Most of them are urban planners. You wouldn't be surprised to hear that. But I also have people with MBA backgrounds, data science backgrounds, Toronto Public Health, social science, development. I have experts on Residential Tenancies Act, because a lot of the work that we do intersects with renters in the city. And I have people who have on-the-ground experience working with people experiencing homelessness. And I hope through my presentation today you can see, based on the range of the work that the Housing Secretariat does, how some of these expertise and experiences that my team has really comes into play, because the challenges and the crises that we're seeing in the City of Toronto are also very diverse and very, very wide-ranging. So today I'm going to talk about a little bit about the Housing Secretariat, the housing and homelessness context in our city, how the city is has been planning to respond to those challenges through the Housing TO Action Plan. And then we're going to look at some case studies. And I created a range of case studies, both from policies that we're going to look at. Academic housing strategy is one of the most recent ones that we've done. We're going to talk about a couple of housing developments that we have recently done that I thought might be of interest. And we're going to again end the presentation with people, especially renters, and how the city is trying to support renters in this hot housing market. Next slide. So the Housing Secretariat, and Jason, thanks for that last slide, because I think it dives really well into my presentation, because the work of the housing is spread across a lot of the housing divisions, agencies, and corporations, and you're going to hear from Sean as well from TCH perspective. But Housing Secretariat, I kind of like to call it the central station. We develop a lot of policies and programs that focus on developing affordable housing, protecting our existing supply of homes, and protecting renters. Our team also has the oversight of all of the social and affordable housing stock in our city. The city has about 90,000 social and affordable homes, one of the biggest portfolios in North America. So we have a team that manages that stock, and we also have a team that really focuses on grants and programs that impact tenants and renters. And also for example, they run the social housing wait list in the city to make sure when rent geared to income homes become available, people who need it most can get access to it first. And we don't do this work alone. We do this in partnership, as I said, both across the city, but also with other orders of government, as well as with nonprofit and private sector organizations. I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. Next slide. So the work that we do is very much embedded in housing experiences of our residents. And when we talk to people who live in our city, wherever they are in their housing journey, one theme that we hear from them is that they feel stuck. They feel stressed, and they don't feel like they have housing options in the city. We look at the number of people experiencing homelessness. So last October, we did a point-in-time count of people experiencing homelessness. Over 15,000 people in our city are living on the street or in the shelter system. 80% of them have been homeless for more than 6 months. That is troubling. And we also see that Indigenous people and Black and racialized people experience homelessness more than non-racialized people in our city. When we talk to people who live in RGI housing, rent geared to income housing, in social housing, we also hear from them that their homes are old. They've been built decades ago. They have repair issues. And they also feel like they cannot move out of their rent geared to income home because where else are they going to go? In an unaffordable city, if they lose that rent geared to income home, what are their options? There are not many. And so if their needs change, if their families grow, or if they want to move to another part of the city because they want to be close to a hospital or to a school, they don't have that many options. So they feel stuck where they are. When we talk to people who live in the private rental market, they feel a lot of stress because many of these homes are not protected by rent control. So they can afford their rent right now. Next year, their landlord can come in and increase their rent, and they would not be able to afford that. So they do not feel that protection. They constantly are at risk of eviction. A lot of older rental buildings also have a lot of disrepair issues. And when we talk to families who are still not able to even get into an ownership market, they might not have affordability problem. They might actually be able to afford a higher rent, but we don't have a lot of family-sized units in our rental stock either. So they don't feel like they have the housing option that meets their needs. When we look at the home ownership part, again, we see a lot of people, especially young people, newcomers, are priced out of the home ownership market. There are historical inequities in the home ownership market for Indigenous and equity-deserving communities as well. And sorry, if you go to the next slide. So what we're seeing that we're no longer dealing with a homelessness crisis. We're really dealing with a multitude of crises in our city. We're no longer looking at a situation where homelessness is the driving factor of our challenges, but our middle-income professionals, our young professionals, are also not able to find the homes that they can afford in our city. And responding to these crises really needs different policy solutions and different actions on behalf of the different orders of government. Next slide. So it is in this context that we developed the HousingTO 2020-2030 Action Plan. This is the City of Toronto's 10-year housing plan that really looks at action across the housing continuum, because we know there are pressures across the housing continuum that we need to address. Really, what the HousingTO plan focuses on are on 5 key focus areas. So creating new supply, no-brainer. We all know that we need to build more homes, but also more non-market homes, more homes that really meet the needs of our low and moderate income households. We know that we need to protect and preserve the existing supply of homes. As Jason said, the city is going through a lot of change. Transit development is great, but is also one of the reasons that can lead to displacement of existing communities. And that's why policies like the rental replacement policy that the city planning has been really a game changer for us to make sure we can protect our existing supply of rental homes. But half of our household population in the city as renters, we also need to make sure that the Housing TO plan has specific actions that support renters and improve their housing stability. What we want to do is to make sure that whoever is housed can remain housed. By helping them where they are, by helping them make sure that they can afford their rents and have the support services that they need, we can actually reduce and prevent evictions. And we also talked about, the fact that, our city is very diverse. Diverse populations come with diverse housing needs, and sometimes our housing programs and policies need to actually make sure they respond to those unique housing needs. So for example, we have specific actions around improving housing outcomes for Indigenous, for women and gender diverse people, for seniors, more recently for students. And so it is important for us to talk about people, what their needs are, and how our housing policies and programs can respond to those needs. And we also know that in a changing environment, in a very dynamic housing market that we're seeing, not only in Toronto, but across the province and Canada, we have to make sure our housing policies continue to be updated and respond to that dynamic environment and changing needs of our residents. And all the work that Jason and his team are doing around transforming our official plan policies is a key factor here. Next slide. So when we created the Housing TO plan, we also created some targets so that we all can drive towards the same outcome for our residents. The most I would say well-known one is 65,000 rent-controlled, affordable, and rent-geared to income. We want to make sure by 2030, we actually have a healthy pipeline of 65,000 rent-controlled homes for our residents. But we also know that building housing takes time. So while we are working on making sure that we have new housing supply, we also have to make sure that our existing residents have access to rent supports. So we have set a target of improving housing affordability for at least 40,000 households through financial measures. We're helping 150,000 first-time home buyers through land transfer tax rebate program. We want to prevent eviction for at least 10,000 households and help residents where they are with in-situ supports as well, so that as their needs change, they don't have to move or they don't have to go homeless. And then looking at the capital repair needs of our housing supply, both from social housing and private rental housing, we also have set a target of improving housing conditions for 75,000 units in both private and social housing stock. So these are some of the key targets, not all of them. And then if you go to the next slide, I'm not going to go through how we're doing with some of them, but it is very important for us to make sure that we are tracking our progress. On some of these targets, we're doing quite well, where we are 5 years in. On some targets, we're behind, right? So it is important for us to make sure that we track our progress. So we have a housing data hub that you can go and visit on your own that actually looks at every single target, how we're doing on an annual basis. And we also have a kind of a data hub for what's in our pipeline. So both rent-controlled housing pipeline and the overall housing supply, you can see where they are in the city. You can see what stage they are at, planning, under construction, and so on. So really a good source for everyone who's interested. And there's also open data here that you can download and analyze the data however that you would like. Next slide. So as ambitious as the Housing TO plan sounds, at least for us, we always knew that the Housing TO plan is not a silver bullet to addressing housing crisis. The crisis that we have in our city is too big to be solved by one plan and one order of government. So we actually need a whole of government and whole of community approach to be able to solve the crises that we have. And that includes not only the City of Toronto and other orders of government, but we need everyone from communities who are welcoming new homes, including new affordable and supportive homes into their neighborhoods, health partners, business partners, other municipalities and regions, as well as the private and nonprofit sector, because they're the ones who actually have to deliver a lot of these homes and a lot of these services that the City of Toronto and other orders of government are funding. So let's look at a couple of policy solutions. And this one, I presented on the academic housing strategy last year when it was still under development. So I'm really glad to be back and be able to actually talk to you about the strategy that is now in action. So one of the areas that we saw a couple of years ago was that we were seeing a lot more of students, especially international students, are having to go to shelters, go to food banks, and really feeling the pressure of the expensive housing and just the city that we have in Toronto. So we started looking at their housing needs, and this is a new area of work for the City of Toronto. This was the first time that we held a very, comprehensive engagement with all 8 academic institutions in the city. We had in-person workshops and pop-ups, and we had an online survey, and we went and talked to the students, and a lot of them were like, "Oh, we can't believe the City of Toronto is here talking to us." This was, a little bit hard for us to hear, right? Because we want our city to serve the future generations and the talent that's coming into our city, and we want to make sure that they feel heard. So really based on some of the feedback that we got, we created the academic housing strategy with really the focus on increasing access to safe, affordable, and diverse housing options for students in Toronto. And we've worked very closely with academic institutions as well to develop this strategy. And if you go to the next slide, some of what we heard in terms of their housing needs, we weren't really surprised. It was very in line with what we're seeing in terms of the housing need and the pressures in the general population. So a student told us about, having access to affordable housing, having access to wraparound support services. The student told us that, where they have an affordable or a rental home, they don't feel safe. They don't feel like they know their rights and responsibilities. They sometimes get, eviction notices, that would require them to leave in 24 hours. And, we know that's not legal, but they didn't feel like they have the right legal tools or the education to be able to fight these eviction notices. So the academic housing strategy was developed with 5 key strategic priorities. One was really around making sure that the students and their voices are heard at the city when we're developing housing policies and programs. So we have an academic housing strategy partnership table that at that point only had representation from academic institutions. So we're expanding that to make sure students are part of that table as part of the implementation of the strategy. We are working to expanding and funding affordable student housing projects and unlocking land for student housing projects. So we're now in the process of identifying a public land that can be piloted to develop affordable housing for students. And we're also looking at expanding all of our housing development incentives so that they can cover new student housing projects. So both of these pieces will come into effect, we're hoping, in 2026. And we're also working with a lot of legal clinics to make sure that when they have resources available for renters, that we can distribute them in a good way to all the academic institutions so that student tenants can also get access to these. And we also heard about the fact that all of these need to be translated, make sure that international students have access to these resources in their preferred language. And so I just wanted to maybe just put on one slide in terms of what it took us to get to, from day one until we get to, the strategy being adopted and going under consultation. So starting in fall of 2022, we started the partnership table. We went to City Council in December of that year to get direction to actually develop this strategy. It took us basically 6 months to do the consultation across all academic institutions, do the analysis in winter of 2024, and then April of this year we came forward with the strategy that was adopted by City Council unanimously. And right now we're kind of working on the implementation of the plan as well. So building more homes, the focus of this session. I wanted to really talk about a couple of case studies that we're working on and very proud of. And if you can go to the next slide. The urban planner in me really likes looking at this map because it actually shows you all of the rent-controlled housing projects that are currently underway in the city of Toronto. But I would say when Jason, you told us you have 740,000 units in the pipeline, but about 80,000 of them are rent-controlled. Right? So it's not the best. It's a big number. 80,000 is still really good if they can get to construction, but out of all the housing supply that's in our pipeline, if you look at what percentage of them would be rent controlled at this point, it's not a lot. These are 250-ish projects across the city, 80,000 homes, about 34,000 rent-controlled homes. So we're doing a lot more in terms of incentivizing new affordable and rent-controlled homes, but in a very challenging housing market that we have, making sure that these homes are affordable and actually can get into construction and to completion requires a different level of effort by all orders of government. So the examples that I want to talk about today is one supportive and transitional housing, and then one is a mixed income affordable and market housing, so that you can see across the housing continuum where they kind of fit. Next slide. So starting from supportive housing, just very quickly, supportive housing is basically a rent geared to income home. So the residents, the tenants, pay 30% of their income on housing, and the rest is subsidized by governments. But they also get access to 24/7 wraparound support services in these buildings, in these supportive housing buildings that are usually provided by very experienced nonprofit housing providers who are, have the capacity and the quality and experience to serve vulnerable residents. And the type of support services that are offered in these homes usually, ranges from connecting them to, a GP, making sure that they have a bank account if they want to reconnect with their families, if they, want to go back to education, or they just want to focus on their, health, that they can get access to those services through the support services that are in the building or kind of connected to others. But there are also like some basic services like laundry. Like what I hear from our supportive housing providers is that the laundry room is the most frequently used room or amenity in these buildings, because a lot of these folks who are coming from, shelters or coming from street homelessness, they come in and they want everything to be clean. So they go into the laundry room and they get access. They can do that. In a lot of these supportive housing buildings, they also have a commercial kitchen on the first floor, so they can get access to food programs if they like, but they also have kitchens in their units. So if they want to cook for themselves, they can also go in. They have fridge, an oven, they can go shopping, and they can, get to cook their favorite meal if they would like to. So that's the level of work that goes into these supportive housing buildings to make sure that it's not just a home, but it's a supportive environment for people to transition out of homelessness into stable housing, and they feel like they have a home that it's theirs, and it's a dignified response to homelessness, really. And so the example that we're going to talk about right now, so Dawn House is supportive housing, but it has some unique elements that I wanted to also raise with you. So first of all, Dawn House is, I have 2 minutes? Oh my God, okay, I'm very behind. So Dawn House is a unique example because it's built on hospital land. So UHN, United Way, and the City of Toronto worked on a partnership, and basically UHN said, I have a parking lot next to a long-term care facility, can you build housing on this? So we worked with them to develop a 4-story modular building on this parking lot, which was very tight in Parkdale neighborhood, and our architects really did not have fun designing this one. But it now has 51 supportive homes for people who were previously homeless, but also they were frequent users of emergency rooms at UHN. So we did this model to make sure that people who are homeless and are taking a lot of capacity from ER rooms, basically emergency departments, can access to supportive homes. And the other unique element about this is that not only they get access to housing support, but they also have a nurse practitioner and doctors visiting the building on a regular basis, because some of these folks have complicated health problems coming out of, the hospital. And so having access to doctors that can visit them in the building on a regular basis and build that trust and that relationship with them is very critical. So this building opened in 2024 and has been going really, really well. And then the next project that I will talk about, and then I'll end my presentation there, is another, again, unique example where we have been able to activate city land designed for cooperative housing. So this is the largest co-op development currently in Ontario. It has about 600 rental units. Half of them are affordable rental, and there's also another element of ownership in this, about another 300 units of ownership, and it's being led by Cooperative Housing Federation of Toronto with 2 private developers that are working on this. And again, it's going to be next to Kennedy GO station, so very transit-oriented, very transit, friendly, and it will start construction very, very quickly. And so we're hoping that this will also become homes that future tenants can be proud of. And the way that this came together was city land. The city provided pre-development funding and financial incentives. There was federal funding in this, so the cooperative housing program offered by the federal government was instrumental to making this project work. And then before I end, if you just want to look to the last slide, I just wanted to invite all of you. As you know, National Housing Day is coming up. So on November 25th, we are holding an event at the YWCA building about developing the renovation bylaw. So the one slide that I cannot present because I don't have time, you're going to hear from a full panel of experts how to develop the renovation bylaw in Toronto was developed, and I'm hoping that you can just go to Eventbrite, RSVP. It will be a very fun evening of celebrating the National Housing Day, but also hearing from some experts about how the renovation bylaw is helping address the housing, some of the housing pressures in our rental system. And with that, thank you, and back to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Mercedes. It's incredible to learn about the range of strategies and also tactics that you're using to provide affordable housing to different kinds of vulnerable communities, including students, not only international students, but students in general who need to be able to afford to stay in this amazing city. And then the examples of co-op housing are also interesting. I know some of our students are looking at how to think through new models of both building housing and also supporting those who will be the residents within it. So thank you again. We're now going to move on to Sean Baird, who's the President and CEO of Toronto Community Housing. Sean.
Thanks very much, Sarah. So, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Really nice to see everybody here, and just my appreciation to all of you for taking an interest in this space and showing up to hear from all of us. You've heard from a couple of others about a lot of the housing planning and policy functions at the city. I'm going to talk a little bit more at the ground level. So well, I'll start with me. So I'm Sean. I'm a transplant from the west coast of Canada. I grew up in Victoria, went to school at UBC, worked in Vancouver for about 10, 12 years as a management consultant. Studied business and then industrial engineering, came to Toronto in the early 2000s and have lived here ever since. So I've got to really experience the housing crisis in Canada on both coasts, and to see in the biggest cities here what it's like on the ground for people to experience that. And I'm privileged now to work in a place where I can have a really meaningful impact on that housing crisis right here in Toronto. Yeah, I love the work that we do at Toronto Community Housing, right? We are, let's go to the, yeah, this one. Let's tell you about who we are, because a lot of people don't, you've heard about Toronto Community Housing, but you don't really know the size and scope and scale of the work that we do. We are the biggest provider of affordable housing in the country, bar none. It's not even close. The next provider that's anywhere near close to us is about a quarter of the size of what Toronto Community Housing is. And that despite the fact that in most provinces, what we do is actually delivered at a provincial level, right? So my equivalent in BC is BC Housing. They serve the entire province. Ontario is unique in that we've downloaded the majority of social service provision, including affordable housing, to the municipal sector. And so we operate that function right here for the City of Toronto. More than 110,000 people live in buildings all across the city that are owned and operated by Toronto Community Housing. So for a sense of scale, that puts us right in between Pickering and Whitby in terms of if we were just a city on our own, the residents living in Toronto Community Housing, we would be in between the sizes of those two cities in Ontario, right? So the scale of what we do and who we serve is pretty massive right here in the City of Toronto. We are a city-owned corporation. The City of Toronto is our sole shareholder and provides about half of our, 40% of our funding. You can see on the pie chart there on the right-hand side. About half of our funding comes from rent, right? Collecting actual rent from tenants who live in Toronto Community Housing. And then the rest comes from some commercial rental that we do and then ongoing subsidies from our city. A couple other pieces I'll point out in the middle there. It says $13 billion in housing. If you look at, that's book value. If you look at replacement, if we actually had to replace the housing that we have, it's closer to $19 billion that we currently own and operate. About half the portfolio was built more than 50 years ago. Our oldest building is 150 years old. Everything anyone has ever thought to try in the social housing space has been tried at Toronto Community Housing. And it's not like software where you try something and it doesn't work, so you upgrade it and everything's better. Like, we try something and it's a building. It's a hard asset. It lives forever, right? So everything that's ever been attempted in community housing, I can point out places in the city that you can go and see that building and what it's like and what it feels like to walk into one of those buildings and why perhaps we don't do things that way today when we build new social housing, right? So I'll talk a little bit about that as I go through. Mercedes explained rent geared to income. The vast majority of our tenants, 90% plus of our tenants, are rent geared to income. So that means they pay a sort of an affordable level of rent, right? They pay about 30% of their income comes into us as incoming rent. A lot of other affordable housing providers are operated at a different ratio, right, where it's a little bit more sustainable. You collect more market rents so that you can use that to offset and subsidize the cost of providing RGI rents. TCHC wasn't built that way. We were built to be deeply affordable sort of across the board, and that's a thing that has created a lack of financial sustainability for us, right? We are always dependent upon growing subsidy from government in order to maintain our operations. Not a great place to be as a corporation, so we're looking at how do we change that over time, become more financially sustainable, and also grow our communities in a positive way. We're a massive spender, right? We spend, it says $380 million in capital every year. That's just on the renewal and renovation side of our business. We spend another 50 to 100 million every year on developing new housing as well. I think we're third on the city list in terms of the actual budget, right? So it's like police, transit, and then us, right? Toronto Community Housing is about third in terms of what the city actually spends its money on in any given year. So let's go to the next one. I'll keep explaining it. So we're all over the city, as I said, but we enumerate about 350 or so different communities across the city. And when we say a community, it might be a tower, it might be a collection of townhouses, that sort of thing. We're the largest one in Canada. We're the second largest in North America, so it's only New York City Housing Authority that's larger than Toronto Community Housing in terms of social housing provision in all of North America. We're in every neighborhood. We have every type of building you can think of: high rises, mid rises, walk-ups, townhomes, some single family homes, although we're largely getting out of that part of the portfolio just now. And we represent the part of non-market affordable housing that is publicly owned and permanently affordable, right? So probably the farthest end of that spectrum. There are all kinds of other approaches to non-market housing and how you provide affordable housing in the city and across the country. We're that piece, right? Government owned, publicly owned, permanently affordable. I talked about 150-year history. Yeah, and then, like I said, we've tried everything, right? So we also represent that evolution of best practice and school of thought within non-market and affordable housing. And I'll give you some examples of things that we've tried over time. So, quick bit of history. I'm sure you guys are studying some of this, so you know some of this, but it all started in 1938 with the Social Housing Act. It's been changed a couple times since then, but really, social housing in Canada really boomed in sort of the post-war period, right? The 50s, 60s, 70s. There was a lot of effort put in, essentially by the federal government, to do massive development in community-owned, what was called typically social housing at the time, large scale. It's gone through a few different revisions. You can see a couple of the photos on here of some of our big neighborhoods in the city: Regent Park, Lawrence Heights, Alex Park. I'll tell you a quick story. You see that highway in the top where it says Lawrence Heights? That's the Allen, right? Everybody knows the historical story of the Allen, right? It came through the northern part of the city. Guess what? It bisected one of the largest community housing neighborhoods in Toronto, Lawrence Heights. You can still go up there today. We're on the east and west side of the Allen. But then there was a massive community uprising and protest to say, don't keep driving that highway through our city. Don't drive through the middle of Forest Hill and through Eglinton and down past St. Clair. And it was stopped through political action, right? So this design of a new highway, interestingly, was allowed to bisect one of the largest social housing neighborhoods in all of Canada, but it was stopped when it reached a different neighborhood in Toronto, right? So just I want to point out that difference in terms of the political power that people in different kinds of housing situations hold, right? And this is decades and decades old, so, you know, it is what it is at this point in time, but we continue to operate with that history and that legacy within our system. Let's go to the next one. I'm going to talk more about Regent Park at the end of our discussion. Regent Park is one of the most unique revitalizations of social housing in the world. People come from all over. We hosted folks from Scandinavia and Hong Kong this year who came to study the work that was done in Regent Park. But this is like how community housing was built in the majority of, say, the 50s, 60s, 70s, even into the 80s. It was this garden city concept. We would take these massive plots of land on the outskirts of the urban core and we would turn them away from the city, right? Regent Park is 70 acres. And until we started the revitalization, that 70 acres, over 2,000 homes, was all social housing, no other types of housing, and it had its back turned to the city. There were only 4 roads that went into Regent Park, 70 acres and 4 road accesses, right? So it's a complete isolation, right? It was done with good intention, right? It was intended to create a short-term housing solution for people and build a community vibe in the center of how it could work better for everybody. But we didn't anticipate the negative implications of that, the social isolation, the fact that there was no banks, there was no convenience stores, there was no grocery stores, there was no mingling and mixing of people who lived outside of Regent Park and people who lived inside of Regent Park, right? So it created all kinds of social challenges that had to be undone as we looked at the revitalization of Regent Park in the early and mid-2000s. So just an example of how we used to do things and how we're starting to learn to do things differently. Let's go to that. Yeah, this one. We operate in a massive environment of need. Mercedes touched on a lot of these things, right? But 13,000 people are experiencing homelessness every night in the city of Toronto. If you go out to the broader GTHA, you can easily double or triple that number. There's just as many people on the wait list for social housing as there are living in social housing. That's true in Toronto, that's true in Vancouver, that's true in all major parts of Canada right now. And you know, we took just under 2,000 people off the waiting list last year. And we added almost 20,000 people to the waiting list last year. So we're not keeping up, right? Like it's a tidal wave of need that is crashing into a really limited supply of affordable housing and non-market housing right here in Toronto and again, all across Canada. Mercedes talked a lot about how people are priced out, so I won't go into more of that. The other piece, the slide doesn't say this, but the other challenge we face is we've never built more non-market affordable housing than we are building right now. But it doesn't matter because we're losing 10 times that amount at the low end of the private market, right? So it's not like it's a binary system and everybody either lives in the non-market system or the market system. It's a spectrum, right? And people cross different levels of that spectrum all the time. So despite building so much on the non-market side, those lowest end of market units are disappearing at an alarming rate. And so that's creating a real crushing pressure on the entire non-market system right now. And so it really speaks to a lot of the policy work that Mercedes and her team are doing on trying to, like the renoviction bylaw is a great example of addressing that, and the rental protection policy that if you're going to take down a purpose-built rental, you got to rebuild that or more as you build going forward. Okay, so what do we do? The housing we have will always be the cheapest and most efficient housing we can get. Right? It costs us over $700,000 a unit to build new community housing right now. It costs an awful lot less than that to maintain the good housing that we already have today. So how do we do that? 4 big programs. We have an ongoing maintenance campaign, $30 to $40 million a year of demand maintenance and support within our buildings. 10-year capital repair program. Yeah, we have a $2 billion plus backlog of repairs that we've got to address, but we're spending $300 to $400 million a year. So you do quick math and you go, okay, great, you'll have it all fixed in 4 or 5 years, right? No, I got to spend $300 million a year just to tread water, right? Because every hard asset we own deteriorates every year, right? Windows have to be replaced, roofs have to be replaced, boilers have to be replaced. So $300 million plus just to tread water. We're spending maybe another 70 or 80 million on top of that to improve the quality of our buildings every year. But we're fighting against a $2 billion plus backlog, right? So it's a slow climb out of a really deep hole is what we're doing right now. The TowerWise retrofit program, we've got this great piece of work that we're doing for deep energy retrofits. The best opportunities to save on energy use and utility costs are big retrofits to our towers. We spend over $150 million a year in utility costs, and I have seen tower retrofits where we go in over a 2-year period, we replace the roof, we reclad the building, we replace the windows with triple pane, we replace the boilers, sometimes we put in heat pumps to be more energy efficient, and we can reduce the utility costs in that building by 60%. We're doing a really cool twin study right now on Brahms Avenue where we've done a massive retrofit on one tower and there's the identical tower right across the street. And we're partnering with the Building Science Lab at the University of Toronto to study the effects of one. One retrofit's done. We're going to do the other one, but we haven't got to it yet. So we're going deep to study how effective has that change been, how much are we saving, and how much are we improving the quality of life for residents that live in that building too. Right? And then the last one is revitalization. So this is, I'm going to get into more revitalization here. So this is really the future of what we're trying to do in terms of the enhancement and changing the stigma, changing the approach, big density increases in terms of providing community housing all across the city of Toronto. So you've probably heard about the big ones, right? We're doing this in Regent Park, we're doing this in Lawrence Heights, we're doing this in Alexandra Park. You see, the basic model is pretty simple, right? We bring the land to the table. Because the one nice thing about having done this for 100 years is we have a lot of land. We're a huge landowner all across the city. I don't know, I guess it's probably like the city, us, and the school boards are probably the 3 biggest ones that actually own land within the boundaries. So we've gone to market and we've said, okay, we've got this underutilized piece of land. Maybe it has a mid-rise on it, maybe it's got some townhomes or a small tower. We're going to take that down and we're going to replace it with high-density housing. When I say high density, like 7 or 8 times the amount of housing that was there before, right? In Regent Park, we took down 2,000 homes. We're going to replace it with more than 17,000 homes, right? So we bring the land to the table. We look for a private market developer to partner with us and say, you put up more housing, often condominium, sometimes private purpose-built rental, and with the benefits of the work that you do to build that more housing, you rebuild ours, and you do it for free, right? So you put up more, you rebuild what we have, you put up ideally more housing for us as well, and you put up private market housing all on what used to be a plot of land that was underutilized by us at Toronto Community Housing. That's the model. It's tricky now because, of course, the condo market has really crashed. And so there's not a lot of developers putting up their hands saying, yeah, we'd love to buy your land and do that right now. But we're confident that that will come back over time and that that model can be reinvigorated. But that's, you know, I've worked in different parts of Canada and Toronto's the only city that has been replacing and renewing community housing because of this model. There has been $0 of federal or provincial funding flowing into new capital for new non-market development in the city of Toronto and really across Canada for, I'd say, like 1998 until 2021. There was basically none. I don't know, Mercedes like, no, you're off by a year or 2. But the point is, like that, there's been nothing, right? So the only model that has been there to work is for us to sell portions of land and to invest. 5 minutes? Wow, okay. All right, let's go to the next one. So these are some examples of what we build now, right, that looks tremendously different. So on the top left, Alexandra Park, that's over by Kensington Market. Don Somerville is down by Queen and Coxwell. Lawrence Heights, I just talked about, right beside the Allen. And then we're moving forward with development on Fir Grove and Swansea Mews. I hope you look at these and you go, that's not what I expected community housing to look like. And it isn't, right? It's beautiful. It's up to incredibly new standards. It's not the kind of community housing we built in the 60s and 70s. I've already gotten into the case study on Regent Park, so let's skip this slide. Next one's a picture of what it used to look like. These were two of the largest buildings that existed in Regent Park. I talked about sort of that isolation and how it was turned away from the rest of the city. You can see in the photo how there was unutilized land all around that. So let's go to the next one. This is a newer picture, right, of how it's been filled in. So you see a lot of condominiums that have been brought into that space. Obviously, the replacement of our buildings as well. One of the key philosophies we've had, and I was just down there for the grade 9 Take Your Kids thing earlier this week. We walked around Regent Park and you test people and you say, which building do you think is a condo building? Which building do you think is a community housing building? And ideally, you can't tell, right? That's the intention. It's supposed to blend in with the rest of the city, be part of the overall city fabric. And we're really proud of the work that's been done to make that happen. Let's go forward to the community engagement piece. Yeah, so the other thing that happens when you do massive revitalization is you displace people, right? Those 2,000 homes contained families, right? There were upwards of 8,000 people living in Regent Park when we decided that we were going to start taking those buildings down. Displacement, gentrification, increased density, those are all challenging things to manage. And if you're a private developer, historically, you just served notice and you evicted people and they were out and you moved ahead with whatever you wanted to build. Now, thankfully, the city has changed that. And there's a whole new policy in terms of how you actually accommodate and give people the right to return to their original communities. But Regent Park was a trendsetter in this. It was a real start to that. So we've actually moved everybody that used to live in Regent Park into neighboring communities. Right? And then as we've rebuilt the buildings, we've welcomed those folks back. And about 2/3 of people decide to come back, and about 1/3 of people decide to stay where they are, which makes perfect sense, right? You get reestablished somewhere, you get your kids in school, and then you want to stay there. But we're happy to be able to welcome so many thousands of residents back into the newly redeveloped part of Regent Park. We do massive amounts of work in tenant engagement and make significant investments in community benefits as well. This is the timeline. So it all kind of started in '95, got some political support, didn't actually get approved by council until 2003. We partnered with the Daniels Corporation between 2006 and 2018. Well, actually, we're still doing work with them today to finish out phase 3. And then in 2020, we actually selected Tridel as our development partner to do work in phases 4 and 5. That's the yellow and red one at the top. That's the northern side. If you walk down Oak Street today, you can look north and you can see Old Regent, and you can look south and you can see New Regent, and it's just a stark difference in terms of what they look and feel like as you walk through them. There's only about 40 households now living mostly in phase 5 there. And over the next 10 years, we're going to take all of those buildings down and we're going to replace them. And of course, we're going to accommodate all of those people and move them into some of those new developments as well. The phase 1, 2, 3 with Daniels was about a $400 million transfer in terms of the sale of the value of the lands and the replacement value of the buildings that they put into that for us. But now we're at sort of a moment of change, right? Because now we're at this point with Tridel, moving forward with phase 4 and 5, and the condo market has gone down. And so what's going to power the investment to invest in those phases of development now going forward? So we're struggling, we're wrestling with that right now, right? Maybe we'll move to more purpose-built rental. Maybe that'll be what drives the change, but we haven't fully decided that yet. Okay, I'll be quick. Community investments, we are the recipient of the largest cash community investments contribution of any developer anywhere in Canada. Tridel is committed to $26.8 million that's going to flow towards the community of Regent Park as they move forward with this redevelopment. That's money that's going to go towards employment opportunities, scholarships, grants for community engagement and nonprofit organizations that do work within Regent Park. It is a transformed place when you walk through it. There's now banks, there's grocery stores, all the roads connect instead of just the 4 that were there before. There's traffic in and out of Regent Park. It's just a part of the city now. It's a desirable part of the city now, right? So massive transformation that has occurred there. It's also gone from being one of the least safe parts of our community portfolio to being one of the more safe parts of our community portfolio. We categorize our buildings based on the levels of violent incidents that happen in the different neighborhoods and different buildings, and we apply different levels of support based on those categorizations. Happy to say Regent Park used to be in the highest level of categorization, and it's now dropped 2 levels down from that, and we only have 4 levels. So pretty significant change has happened. Now, it's taken 20 years, right? But that's what community redevelopment is, right? It's a slow transformational process. I must be out of time, yeah? Okay. I don't know, what else should we talk about? Accessibility, environmental standards, we exceed all of these standards, right? So we don't build to the OBC code for accessibility. We have a bespoke, developed standard that we do with people who live with disabilities within our communities. We have a dedicated committee that designs standards that we build towards, and we build way more than are required by our city partners in terms of what accessibility units we build within our portfolio. We also build to a higher level of environmental standard than is required by the private market. We're sort of the testing ground for those new environmental standards, right? Because we're city owned and we need to live up to that requirement, and then the city can look at what the implications of those requirements are before they roll them out and impose those across the entire market. Next one, I talked about this. Next one. This is the first building that we're going to build in Regent Park Phase 4. This is what it's going to look like. We're partnering with Architects Alliance to design this building. It's beautiful. I can't wait to get started. 270 new homes are going to come up on the west side of Phase 4 of Regent Park. That's going to be the first one that we build with Tridel. And then I just want to take a couple minutes on this one real quick. I started with the history of social housing. I do want to close with, like, what does the future look like for social housing in Canada and in Toronto? First, revitalization and maintaining our existing portfolio. This is an expensive business to be in, right? We have to keep investing. We've got to maintain the housing we have. We can't afford to lose it. And we got to keep growing the portfolio, right? We're good at that. We know how to do that, but we need massive capital in order to continue doing that well. The second one, housing and well-being. We're in this really, Mercedes talked about Dunn House, right? Which is like a really amazing investment the city has made in support of housing. But how many people live there? 51. I have at least 2,000 people who are residents in Toronto community housing right now who would qualify to live in supportive housing. There's no question, right? So we don't need one Dunn House, we need 100 of those all across the city, right? So we are caught in this interesting spot now with rising levels of acuity, rising levels of need in terms of access to primary health care and mental health supports that are just simply not available, right? And so because there's not enough of that to go around, community housing ends up being often the houser of last resort for people that could benefit from greater levels of service that are not available in the broader community, right? So that's kind of a point of constriction that we live in right now. And then macroeconomics. We used to serve the bottom, we would say 20% of income earners in the city, but the reality is now the bottom 50% could theoretically qualify to live in community housing. Canada, only about 3.5% of the housing stock in Canada is non-market community owned. In the OECD, the average is 7%. So we think of ourselves as a socially progressive country, and that's generally true, but not for housing, right? We're less than half of the OECD average of what the non-market portfolio typically looks like. And you compare us to Scandinavia and the UK, and they're at like 20% plus, right? So the macroeconomics are pretty clear that if you want to be able to provide access to affordable housing and do it in an efficient way, publicly owned and operated non-market housing is one of the best ways to do that. Especially, we got to deal with the stigma. We got to deal with the approach and whether or not we can attract people into sort of that moderate income workforce housing sort of approach to things. And then lastly, modern methods of construction. We're a prolific builder. We opened 3 new towers in the city of Toronto this year. I would challenge you to find any other organization that can claim that. We build all the time. We're building new developments. We're renovating what we have. We have to embrace modern methods of construction. Modular, cross-laminated timber, all of those kinds of things. We are embracing that. The government of Canada is investing heavily in this industry because the industry itself can't keep up with the overall level of demand. So they're investing to try to prop up that industry, grow the manufacturing and logistics space within modular off-site housing development, and we can be a big investor in that. So alongside other housing development operators all across Canada. So I think that's all I wanted to cover. Thanks very much for hearing me out, and really proud of the work we do at TCHC.
Sean, thank you again so much. And again, really exemplary thinking of new models and ways of thinking forward, building new kinds of partnerships, and then some of the challenges with those in this current era where the housing market has its challenges. So we only have about 7 minutes for questions. I have some, but I'm going to go right to the students who are in the room and online to see whether they would like to jump in. We have one right here. So.
This question is for Sean. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very insightful. My question is about Regent Park, since I already have like some studies there. Some residents have talked about feeling excluded because of the income difference. There's still no high schools in the area. They don't have a Toronto Public Library like in the exact area, and also some people haven't been able to move back yet in like many years. Since it started. So I'm just curious how those issues are going to be addressed moving forward.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Thanks. It's true, right? So when you transform a community and you bring it into a mixed income approach, it is a total change, right? And then you have to look at the integration of how different tenures and tenancies are going to live side by side, how they're going to operate and live harmoniously. And it's not a straight path, right? There are bumps in how we do that. I can confidently say that the level of community engagement and development and harmony within that community is far greater than it historically has been. However, that doesn't mean that it's felt uniformly, right? Individuals feel differently about that, and that's perfectly okay. Sometimes you have to weigh some of the greater good questions, right? And the fact that we've been able to 8 times the number of housing within that space is a big part of the contributor to that. But we've also brought in banks and grocery stores and convenience stores and restaurants that were never there before. There is a library coming as part of phase 5. So it's a few years away, but it's absolutely coming. And when you have a big space like that, not just one little postage stamp lot, you can plan and build an entire community, right? So that was done sort of from the get-go. But I want to honor the question of people feeling changed and affected, because that's true, right? The community they had before is not the same community they have today, and we respect that, and we try to work with them to build what that community can be going forward.
Thank you very much. We have a question in the corner.
Hi, I think multiple of you can maybe answer this, but I wanted to know how the new avenues that you opened up for like mid-rises will address mid-income tenants or mid to low-income tenants, as well as larger family structures. I currently live in a rent-controlled building on one of these avenues, and our current green space has a proposed mid-rise being added to it, which is causing a big uproar in our community, because that's our community green space for baby showers, taking your dogs out to pee, family events. And for us, that's being taken away. So I kind of want to know how you're going to address our community, and especially those larger families that are getting moved out of their units to create rooms to join these mid-rise buildings.
Sure, I can start. And I'll start by saying one of the reasons for kind of not just saying we're going to create this one little segment of avenue here, one little segment of there. We kind of did almost 300 kilometers all at once, was so that you would, so the impact of that change could be felt over a broader area and is going to be more gradual over time. Both the speakers kind of spoke about the importance of the rental replacement policies that we have in place, because I do anticipate that some of that avenue's development is going to be including demolition of existing rental units that exist, and so those replacement policies will come into play. The other item I'll note is we have had in place for a while a policy that's proven to be pretty effective around targets for family-size units and looking to get 25% of units to be 2 bedrooms or more. And those continue to be in place. It is sometimes challenging from a planning perspective. We don't have necessarily all the tools in our toolbox we'd like to have to kind of completely shape and direct the form of development that occurs. But we try to kind of make use of the ones that we do have.
Mercedes.
Yeah, I would just add one other thing, which sometimes gets lost, because changing the official plan and the zoning permissions is one thing. It's great. It's an enabling tool. but making sure that homes that are created as a result of those zoning permissions being affordable and being appropriate for the need that we have in our city is a completely different thing, right? Zoning on its own doesn't matter how much density you give people, that is not going to be enough to create affordability in many cases. We have certain tools in our toolbox, as Jason says. For example, when we're activating our own land, we can put in more strict targets around at least 20% or 30% being affordable, at least 20% of the affordable being rent-geared to income, but that all costs money. So it's in addition to our land that goes in for free, it's in addition to density that's going in through our planning and development review colleagues, but it takes another level of capital funding or operating funding to make them affordable. Again, when it's our land, we have a lot more control over design, what type of unit types. When it's private land, not so much. There are guidelines that they have to adhere to, but as Jason said, there's limited control over those private sites.
Okay, thank you. We've got time at least for one quick question there, and there is someone with a question here. Let's see if we can get to both. Okay. So fast question, fast answers if possible.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentations. I'm really interested in the placemaking aspect that Jason mentioned. You were talking about how small businesses and small shops help revitalize the streetscape. I'm working on a project right now with a community partner to sort of propose alternative strategies on waste collection, because I know that that's a very land intensive process that we have at the city right now, but I'm wondering, from your role and your within your jurisdiction, what are things that the city is doing to promote small businesses?
Great, thank you.
A couple of answers very quick. Yes, garbage collection is a big part of that. And actually, I was just meeting yesterday with our economic development colleagues around sort of doing some outreach to local business about the ways, just raising awareness about the ways in which garbage collection approaches impacts both the form and viability of small-scale retail on Main Street. It's not a connection that many people make, but it actually is quite significant. And so two quick answers to your question. One is through design. So looking at things like garbage collection, looking like things like urban design guidelines, floor plate requirements in terms of making sure that the new retail space coming in that's often replacing older retail space still meets the needs of kind of those smaller scale retails. And then we know that we have some particularly significant communities. We're doing some work right now in Little Jamaica, in Chinatown, at Church and Wellesley, around culturally significant businesses. So businesses that kind of contribute particularly cultural importance or significance to those neighborhoods, and what kind of programs we can have in place as a city to kind of ensure that some of those businesses are reintegrated into the new development.
Okay, final question here very quickly. Thank you.
Hi, I was curious, you were talking about how the condo market is going down, or the rental, some of those prices are going down. And I was curious how you guys reconcile that conflict between using at-market rentals and condos to fund affordable housing. It requires those markets to be profitable and to be doing well. But then that you were saying that the difference between the cost of affordable housing and then the cost of market housing is also pushing more people into community housing. So how do you guys reconcile that?
Really good question. So the slowdown in the condo market is challenging from a couple of perspectives. Majority of our rental stock, unfortunately, over the past decade has come from condos. These are condos that are built, bought by investors, then put back on the rental market. Majority of them, if they're built after 2018, they don't have any rent control. So they're rental stock, but they don't give the renters the security of tenure that a purpose-built rental building would give them. So we're actually using this window of opportunity to put more incentives towards purpose-built rental, because we're at a point that rental developments can actually compete with condos over land, over resources, over funding. All orders of government, specifically the federal government and the City of Toronto, are putting a lot more funding and incentives into purpose-built rental. The apartment construction loan financing program at the federal level has been very, very helpful. The city, for the first time, created a program last year to actually expand incentives to purpose-built rental market homes. for about 7,000 units within our financial means. We got applications for about 35,000 units because there's a need in the sector. So there's an opportunity that we're taking advantage of. Again, the city can only do so much. We've been asking consistently other orders of government to come in and help us be able to do more purpose-built rental, because the condo market will come back, as Sean said, and we want it to come back, right? Because it is a very important residential development sector in our city. But we do have this window of opportunity to do more purpose-built rental, and I think all orders of government recognize that. Rental development continues to be challenging within this market, and without the government investment, unfortunately, I don't think any of the rental developments will be able to get to construction in the next 2 years.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, we have two students from OCAD University who want to offer some words of thanks and brief reflections. We're going to start with Issy Nguyen. Issy.
Hello. I'm Izzy Wen, and on behalf of OCAD University, I would like to extend a great thank you to the representatives that took the time out of their busy days to come discuss Toronto's community housing crisis and solutions with us. Jason Thorne, your discussion on Toronto's city planning and focus on creating quality neighborhoods and communities, ensuring they're green, community valued, and transit friendly, sparked ambition and reassurance among us students. For example, as an environmental design student, joined by many of those who study architectural planning, designing here, learning about the creation and planning initiatives of our city not only reassures the citizens in our community, but it strives us into the collaboration of improving the city as well. And we thank you for addressing those issues revolving around that. Sean Baird, your work for the Toronto community housing is deeply valued, and thank you for not only sharing your work done in maintaining building affordable homes, but the issues around it. Additionally, it was admirable seeing the development of Regent Park and the acknowledgement that Toronto community housing has given to the families in those communities and being accommodated and welcomed back as well. Again, thank you from the young, striving artists and designers of Toronto. We appreciate the acknowledgement of us students and the community's housing needs, as well as the dedication being put into these sessions and contribution to facing challenges that improve the city of Toronto as well.
Thank you, Issy. Thank you. And now some words from Xiao Zhang.
Good morning. I'm Xiao from OCAD University. On behalf of my fellow students here and from other institutions, I would sincerely thank the City Hall team and all the speakers for today's session. Mr. Sean, it was inspiring to hear about your vision for Toronto's future, your focus on creating shared public spaces, promoting mid-rise and green housing to address affordability, and enhancing our public transportation to support mixed-use transit like walking and cycling is critical, much like integrating Toronto's heritage with innovative and modern planning. Ms. Madani, I greatly appreciate your leadership in developing and implementing the city's Housing TO 2020 to 2030 action plan. Your work on modular and rapid housing initiatives, which helped create affordable and supportive housing, complete with service for vulnerable residents and those experiencing homelessness. It's truly admirable. Thank you again to all the speakers for sharing your expertise and insight. Your perspective had deepened our understanding of the opportunities and challenges involved in shaping a city that works for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have two more very brief conversations. First from Jennifer McGowan, who's the Manager of Public Consultation, to share the opportunity for students to engage with budget planning, and then some final remarks from me.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer McGowan. I'm the Manager of Public Consultation in the City Manager's Office, and I think some of you would have received an invite to a session that starts at 11:15 today downstairs in the glass room that you pass as you go into the East Tower. So we're inviting you to come and share your ideas about the budget for the City of Toronto, the 2026 budget. We'll have about 45 minutes to hear your thoughts and get your creative ideas and what your priorities are for the budget. Some of you have registered. If you haven't registered, you're still welcome to join. So we invite you to come downstairs right after the session and join us to hear your thoughts and have a say in what our budget looks like in 2026. So thank you so much. And if you have questions, come find me.
Great, thank you. So one final request, if there are any students from the universities who are not yet matched up for your shared project, you can meet very briefly to my right after this session ends, and we'll try and match you up. I want to ask for a very, very strong round of applause and maybe some woohoos for our speakers today. We learned a lot about things that really matter. So our next session where we're in person will be in Council Chambers on November 21st, Arts, Culture, and Community Resilience. We'll see you there. Thank you again, everybody. Please join the budget consultation.